the road. Come the morning, oh, I'll be gone. Pouring rain, oh, to hear that train. There she comes, won't you get on? Won't you get on? Take a sip, I'ma pack my grip. One more trip, and I'ma move on. I'ma move on.
The people that you cheer for, the people that you love to wear their jerseys, the people that excite you on Sundays, Mondays, and Thursdays are affected by this. You know what I mean? It's deeper than just sack fumbles and touchdowns. You know what I mean? It's like all of us have experienced some sort of racism, some sort of issue in America in general. I think it's extremely important to support the people that you love to watch. Why wouldn't you want to support the people that you love to watch? I think that's the biggest piece of it all is understanding that everybody that has a jersey on is a person, and then also realizing that those people have some interesting and different perspectives on a lot of things. So why wouldn't you want to know more and dive deeper into some of the social issues that they have to deal with?
Take the layers off of an NFL player, you know, starting with your helmet and your name and your jersey, right? And you go back and start hearing the personal stories of all the players and all the coaching staff and all the staff in the organization. They're still, you know, human beings and still have a history that sometimes we forget about. And so I think it's important to go back to our hometowns, to kind of peel the layers off and see us as individuals, as, you know, little kids who grew up wanting to be in the NFL one day, to make that connection to here's how we were formed, here's how we were trained, here's, you know, our motivation to come back and help a family member out, or be a role model for those kids from those same schools and same parks and playgrounds that we grew up in.
There is no greater power than the collective us. Now, we all come from someplace different. The NFL fan base is incredibly diverse. Our country is incredibly diverse. Diverse in ethnicity, diverse in experience, diverse in socioeconomic backgrounds. I'm not looking for sameness. What I'm looking for is a shared acknowledgement of humanity and an understanding that some of the humans that have lived in this country, that have struggled on this journey to be American, have had an experience that's dynamically different than others. And because of that, we have to begin to engage each other with that understanding. That's the point of a journey like this. It's to stir up the pot a bit, to unsettle folks who may have thought they understood why they were doing what they were doing, and create the space for continual investigation of their why. I reached out to the Seahawks to create this documentary because I figured that we could play this for our community here and the people who believe in our work, and they would celebrate it. But I wanted it to reach farther. I wanted it to reach out to a fan base that doesn't necessarily look like the young people we serve every day. And I wanted those people, our community members, to be able to hear our experience and to be able to journey with us towards a more just world. I believe in our America, and I believe that there is no greater power than a collective us, but we need everyone to join us on this journey towards justice.
In a moment, we are meeting Leroy Clemens is his name. He was 3 years old when the murders of the 3 civil rights workers took place in 1964. He's from Philadelphia, Mississippi, and as he grew up, he became more aware of this story. One of his teachers gave him a book that told the history of these 3 civil rights workers, and he knew, everyone knew in the neighborhood, that the killers still lived in the community.
My name is Leroy Clemens. I'm the executive director of the Neshoba Youth Coalition here in Philadelphia, Mississippi. I'm also the founder of the Philadelphia Coalition, a group of 30 people, a multiracial group that brought to justice a Klansman in 2005 for the murders of James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Swarner. We're going to talk about what happened here in 1964. It was bad, it was ugly. This city was an ugly place to be. This was not a nice city at all in the 60s. And I grew up here. Trust me, I know I was here. I had first-hand account of it. I saw it firsthand. Over the next 40 years, since that time, we have really transformed this city. The black-white relationship in this city is excellent. People get along. We're all at the table. We make decisions together. We work together. But like I said, we're going to talk about what happened in 1964. But we're also going to focus on why it happened. And then at the end, we're going to talk about, things that we all can do to make sure these things doesn't happen again.
We learn history so often by turning pages in a book. And although you can glean from that what may have happened from a high level sort of baseline understanding, until you feel the texture of a place and you hear the tone of the voice of those that survived some of that trauma and folks who are carrying that history forward as their ancestors survived that trauma, when you put your feet in that soil, there's something dynamically different about that experience. And so having people who are carrying that living memory forward based on their own lived experience or based on the stories that have been gracefully handed to them, and being able to have that conveyed to us in real life in that moment is absolutely transformative. I don't know that you can learn history, or better yet, I don't know if you can experience history in any other way.
We're in West Philadelphia. This is the west side of Philadelphia. We came across those railroad tracks. Those railroad tracks used to be the dividing lines between white Philadelphia, black Philadelphia. 1964, it was the dividing line. You knew, as an African-American young man, my parents didn't care where I went, as long as I stayed on this side of the railroad tracks. In 1964, during the height of Freedom Summer, we were probably one of the worst places for racism and bigotry in the country. The life of a black man during the 60s and prior to the 1960s had no value in Mississippi. I mean, they would kill you and nothing would be done. This was life for black people in Mississippi in the 60s and prior. These are things that you don't hear, the history books don't talk a lot about, because everybody thinks, well, that only happened during slavery. No, these type of things were still happening in the early 60s in Mississippi.
And then you would, in effect, change the system so that there would be dictation from executive office rather than legislation under our present system of representation?
Well, this is a system, but it is not democratically applied in so many southern states. Let us take the state of Mississippi as an example. You have about 20,000 Negroes registered to vote in the state of Mississippi. Now, many of these people are not registered because all types of conniving methods are still being used to keep Negroes from becoming registered voters. And in fact, some are even killed for seeking to lead voter registration drives, so that the democratic process is not operative in situations like Mississippi and Alabama and so many of the other states, southern states, where there is this determined effort to keep Negroes from becoming registered voters.
Michael Swarner and James Chaney had visited this church on several occasions trying to establish a freedom school. Now, Andrew never visited this church, and you'll find out later on why he never had an opportunity to come. But they came over and they were trying to establish freedom schools in this church. And while they were working on it, before they could get it done, they were actually murdered and killed by the Klan on June 21st, 1964.
It was remarkable to me that the gentleman who was bringing us along was able to speak with such joy, such candor, still with such vulnerability about something so horrific.
They were also voting that night on whether or not they were going to allow Michael Swarner and James Chaney to come here and establish a freedom school. But what happened that night was that one of the young men one of the young ladies had her son to drive her to the meeting. And while they were meeting, he was walking around on the church ground. But there was a Klansman that was coming through here on his way to the Klan rally that they were having across the street on the other side. He came through and he mistakenly thought that the young man was armed and patrolling the ground. So he goes to the meeting and tells the Klan organizer that there's something going on there through the church because they got armed guards patrolling the ground. And so the Klansmen came over to investigate. When they got here, the people were dismissing. They let 5 of the men go, but as the people were going out on the south end here, several of those people were attacked by members of the Klan. Later that night, the history books record that the Klan came back over here and burned this building to the ground. But it was the burning of this church and the beating of those people that on that Sunday afternoon when Michael Swan and James Chaney arrived back in Meridian that late Saturday night. And that's what made them come up here that Sunday afternoon, because they wanted to see the ruins of the church. They also wanted to meet with the people who were beaten. Andrew Goodman comes with them. He learns that they're coming up here that Sunday morning, and he tells them, I want to go with you. He gets in the car and he drives up here with them. Well, when they get here, again, another black man sees them in the community, gets in his vehicle and drives into town and tells the deputy sheriff that those boys that y'all have been looking for are out there in the community. And so the deputy sheriff comes out, sees them, arrests them, takes them to that little jail, contacts the Klan leader, lets them know that there was only one condition about killing him. He could not be killed in Lauderdale County. They could kill him anywhere outside of Lauderdale County. And then at 10:30 that night, they were released, thinking they were free, not knowing that there were 4 loads of Klansmen waiting on them down the road.
Imagine being in a car with a friend, driving along a dark highway with a car following you from behind, knowing that you just got released from a jail cell for being falsely imprisoned for the crime of wanting to register voters in Mississippi. I could tell the story of what happened to those 3 men, but that story I could tell would pale in comparison to what it was actually like to stand on that dark road.
They were on their way back to Meridian off the highway here that we just come. But when they got on the highway there was 4 loads of Klansmen that were waiting on them. They thought they were free and going back home in peace. They had no idea that the Klan had already had planned to kill them. And so they had 4 carloads of Klansmen waiting on them and chased them down that road. And when they finally got them stopped, they brought them back to this spot. Edgar Ray Killen chose this spot because he said every day he go into town, he wanted to be able to look over here and see the spot where those boys were killed. Edgar Ray Killen, who the guy who I say planned it all and was the one that gave the order, he got off because one juror said she couldn't bring herself to convict a preacher. He was a jackleg preacher, part-time preacher. And so the vote was 11-1. Here's another thing a lot of people don't know. While they were looking for those boys during the 44 days, they found 9 other bodies. 9 other black bodies that they couldn't identify. And they stopped looking because they couldn't explain who those bodies were that they kept finding. Every time they kept looking, they kept finding more bodies. And I told you in Mississippi in the 60s, the life of a black man had no value. There wasn't anything different for them to shoot a black man in Mississippi and kill him and throw him in the river somewhere, and nobody will be prosecuted, nobody will be looking for him. We got a law passed in 2006 that mandated civil rights education be taught in every school in the state of Mississippi. Not only did we get the law passed, they turned around and then asked us to write the curriculum, because we wanted to make sure that the truth was going to be told.
We feel like we're farther removed than what we are, but yet if we don't learn this, internalize it, inevitably we're going to repeat it.
Welcome, welcome, welcome off the bus, folks. We're not going to spend a ton of time at this spot, but I'm gonna read a bit from that particular speech that invoked those iconic words that many of us still lead in and live through today.
One of the most wild things about that corner is there's a playground right behind it, and connected to the playground is a graveyard. And then there's some houses that are dilapidated that are surrounding the space, and there's a single marker on the corner where this historical speech happened by Stokely Carmichael where he called out Black power for Black people.
June 16th, 1966. Today is what? November 17th, 2022. How far have we traveled? I did not read a single word that could not still apply today.
We will define black power. He will listen and recognize it. That's all. That's all. Yeah. So you ought not to be worried about their debates about violence. You ought to tell them clear. If you don't want any trouble, keep your filthy white hands off our beautiful black.
And this is when, hundreds of people had come down to this particular part of Mississippi to rally together for the sake of voting rights, for the sake of empowering the black voice. And here we are in this corner, and it's a single marker in a neighborhood that's falling apart, where you have a playground that's bordered by a graveyard. I really want people to understand how historic this place is, and yet what surrounds it is anything but history in the way that we'd like to imagine it to be. If this wasn't a black man saying black power to black people, I wonder if this was one of our founding fathers who made some sort of great speech in this moment, what else would exist there and what would the surrounding area look like?
And then we went to Bryant's Grocery, stood outside where Emmett Till was accused of causing great harm of whistling at a white woman. Went to the riverfront where his body was found and had a reflective ceremony. It's hard to imagine that so much can be accomplished in a single day, but as we continue to create this landscape and continue to walk along this path of our ancestors, it's becoming clearer and clearer to me that we are in dire need for repair.
This theater, this stage, this platform that we call a courtroom is something that I'm really, really familiar with. And to be in this particular one, where one of the most egregious plays were put on, this most egregious miscarriage of justice, to be able to see the jury box, to be able to sit in the seats that were facing where the judge would sit, to have some of our teams sitting where these actors in this miscarriage of justice would have portrayed their parts, and to know that these men were given nothing except their liberty when a black boy's body was killed, murdered, dragged, deformed, and presented for the world to see. It's horrific to know that that happened. It still happens today. We may not have bodies being dragged and brutalized in the same way that Emmett was, but we have bodies of young black children being dragged into courtrooms for adolescent behavior and being criminalized in such a way where they're locked up for disproportionate amounts of time and very rarely get the opportunity to be seen as a possibility to be developed and not a problem to be solved. Yet we have these white men who are clearly guilty, let go because of the privilege they held in their whiteness, because of the assumed guilt that was held in this black boy's body. Prior to going to the Lorraine Motel, we actually had lunch at the place where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had lunch at, and then we went right over to the Lorraine Motel. And the Lorraine Motel is where Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered. And as you stand outside, you can see the balcony. You can see there's a flag that's draped over. And if you go through the museum, you can actually walk through it and see the room set up as it was that day that the good Reverend was there before he stepped out for a smoke and his life was taken away. And again, this is, you sit in the weight of this moment where you know how different things could be if that never happened. What people don't often consider about the good Reverend was that at that moment he was killed, he wasn't revered as he is today. He wasn't being quoted in high schools, middle schools, elementary schools. They didn't have streets named after him everywhere. In fact, his approval rating was at an all-time low. And it was at an all-time low because what he began to talk about wasn't just liberty and rights for black people, but he began to launch into what was the Poor People's Campaign, which was an emphasis on how do we make sure that everyone has access to housing, healthcare, and a livable wage. And that's when he became most dangerous. And I think, again, if you stand in the tension of that and you listen to the conversations that we're having today with the dramatically rising inflation, cost of living, particularly in our region, and how untenable it is, and you can see that this is still a conversation that must be carried forward. People often say it's a marathon, and I remind people it's not a marathon, it's a relay, because none of us are starting from the beginning. We're simply taking the baton from those that preceded us and going forward as far as we're able in this journey that we have. The image that comes to mind for me is this, is that when I remember watching videos of Hiroshima when I was a child, and how when the atom bomb hit, it left shadows of bodies of people who were demolished by this horrific act. And these shadows would live on the walls behind them because of the nature of the bomb. And I say that, I share that because you have this church that sits on the corner where this horrific bombing happened, and then you have these expression of art that portray out in a park that are adjacent to it that also feel like shadows of that moment that are still held in memorial throughout time. And as you walk through the park, you get to experience just the joy, but also the pain of what occurred at that church many years ago.
The 16th Street Baptist Church, beautiful church, horrible incident, bombing where 4 little girls' lives were taken away as a result of hate crimes from the KKK.
So when we first walked in, we went into the big room where they actually hold their congregation, and they pointed out to us the glass windows, and they had it gifted from somebody in Wales. And what was pretty interesting to me about that is it had a picture of Jesus on there, and Jesus was black. And that's something that you don't see too often. Even in that same church, they have far lighter depictions of Jesus. So that's how it started. They got us in the big room, told us the history, that this was a church that had been around a really long time, since like the 1800s.
When we go into the 16th Street Baptist Church and we sit in those pews and we can consider what it was like for those parishioners right after this horrific thing happened, and this is a living history. There's still people who attend that church today who are alive at that time.
The church bombing is something that's been well publicized. A lot of people know about that this church was blown up and 4 young girls died at the church. But later on that day, there were actually 2 young men who were shot and killed in the streets. So it wasn't just one incident on that Sunday when these young girls died. There was more violence. One was shot by a police officer and the other one was shot by a citizen, but there was this commonality in the fact that there was no justice.
And again, another one of these moments where a horrific bombing at a church that happened in the 60s, you think, wow, well, how could that ever happen in a day like today? But yet and still, we have people who will go into synagogues and hold people hostage and do all kind of egregious things. You have Dylan Roofs of the world that will go into churches and shoot at people. This is still happening today. Man, Rickwood Field, the oldest baseball field in America, and it was a game that black folks were allowed to play, but only allowed to play separate from white folks in their own league, the Negro Leagues. And again, we can fast forward it to today, where black players in Major League Baseball are at an all-time low. So it's what's unfortunate, but real, is that like no matter where we go on this journey, like even these moments of great joy, they're also anchored in the fact that like there's something here to learn. There's a lesson that we can take from this space.
First, I'm going to begin with Georgette Norman. Miss Georgette Norman. She is a historian, thespian, and activist. She was the first director of Troy University's Rosa Parks Museum, graduate of Fisk University, which is an HBCU, and she has worked with the government of the Virgin Islands, the Smithsonian, the Prison Project at the Staten Correctional Facility in Alabama, amongst many other partnerships.
I lived in the Virgin Islands about 15 years before I came home. And my first house was totally concrete. But I lived right across from the ocean. And I remember seeing these tanker ships come in, because Hess Oil is on St. Croix. And I'd watch these huge things. And then you began to see them kind of come out of the water. And then they would come further out of the water. And there'd be ships from Hess collecting the oil to carry to be processed at Hess. And those images have stayed with me. And I don't know, it's because I was coming to this today that it was so on my mind. But I looked at that oil and that cargo. And I realized that that's my history. That's from whence I come. Because folk that look like me that came to this place, the United States and islands around, were in the hold of a ship like that oil was. And we called that oil black gold. And that was also the name of people like me, black gold.
What I took from it and what I hoped our team took from it and what I hope folks that get a chance to watch part of it take from it is like, this is just people doing people things as an acknowledgement of our shared humanity. This isn't anything that's exceptional. It's regular people doing things that matter because it's simply the right thing to do.
And the most important thing I think that I learned growing up in the 50s, that I was taught, be, do, have. That you are a being. And they didn't put black, white, green, or purple on it. You are a being. And your being will let you do, and your doing will let you have. I have lived long enough to see that most people now live backwards. They live, I have to have, so I can do, and therefore be. Growing up, the black community understood who they were, what they were, and they were defined by themselves. They were able to do what they did because they were beings.
There's so many people who are part of this movement besides Martin Luther King Jr. There's so many people who made this thing happen. And some of the people who we pay the most attention to today were forgotten soldiers, not foot soldiers, in the not so recent past. I mean, like, they were talking about Rosa Parks and how Rosa Parks was in Detroit having a hard time finding work and was struggling check to check. Rosa Parks.
It's important for us to really take responsibility for what we did not do. We spend a lot of times when we talk about civil rights and all these issues, we talk about what happened and what we did and the power of all of that. And you can't go anywhere in the world and not hear the name Rosa Parks. What happened to Rosa Parks after she made her heroic stand? The MIA was still around. They didn't hire her. The NAACP might have been banned in Alabama, but it was still going on around the country. They didn't hire her. So what responsibility do we have to those who give it all? Because these were all social justice workers. We were not civil rights workers. We were social justice workers. Those are the people who touched me and moved me forward. And when I do my work on Rosa Parks, I always say, that was a boat that was completely out the water and took us out the water with it. And we left her to drown. We need to talk about that. Yeah. We've got to be able to tell a full story. Be very, very clear. And say, what was my responsibility to any of that? And how then do I begin to talk about it? And say that was a disservice.
And to hear that story about Rosa, but also to hear their voices. And these are people who are in relative anonymity, where you wouldn't know their names, but they were important parts of this movement.
We need to have more people that are willing to make the sacrifice. Because people get tired, they get weary. You know, and when they get tired and weary, there's nobody to take the gauntlet and move on a few more steps while you get a little rest. You know, it just dies.
The Legacy Museum, EGI, is broken up into two parts. There's the museum itself, and then there's the memorial to those who were lynched. The memorial to those who were lynched is patterned after the memorial to the murdered Jews in Berlin. And in Berlin, you have these columns that are placed, and they're these cement columns, and they're indiscriminately placed at varying elevation and height along rolling concrete. And in Montgomery, you have these columns that are hung at varying heights. So it's really similar play on the two memorials, that they both capture the same thing, which is these historical harms that have happened. But in Montgomery, it lists the names of those who were lynched and the counties in which they were lynched in, acknowledging that this is where these things happen.
Within the line of work that I do, I can take this back to my students and kind of give them more knowledge on, you know, our history, because it's not just Black history, it's it's American history, it's history, period.
Inside of the Legacy Museum, they did a remodel of it somewhere during the pandemic, probably 2021. I went there pre-pandemic, 2019, and it's dynamically different. The actual material of story that it tells in there is very similar, but the way that they tell that story is mind-blowing. And what you learn throughout the Legacy Museum is so much of what I've been talking about, is that you have the opportunity to hear testimonies from people who were living enslaved through these holographic images that's absolutely gripping. You walk into the space and dive into the history of enslavement, and it brings you current to the history of policing, incarceration in America, and it makes a really clear story that where we were at the point of enslaving and where we are today in mass incarceration are cousins of each other at worst, but siblings most likely to be true. It creates this really poetic narrative that we have traveled a long time in distance if we consider years, but we haven't traveled a long time if we consider justice.
Selma's a special place. It's one of those places where you don't realize it until you get a little older, but growing up there, I had a chance of living in a real-life museum, so to speak. Everybody's connected to all the historical events that happened in Selma, the civil rights history that's there. And so, you know, we talk about the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and every day we would ride across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and you sometimes lose sight of how important that moment was for Bloody Sunday and the fight for civil rights and for equality and for voting rights in Selma. And so it was the older I got, the more and more I realized how important Selma was to a national movement, and how important, you know, these symbols and these churches and these you know, maps and things that we saw every single day actually play such a historical role in where our society has come from and then where we're still trying to go.
Thank you. Can you hear me? All right. Yeah, so born and raised here in Selma. I went to Auburn University, went to the University of Alabama Law School. A lot of that stems from my time being here in Selma.
I've always been of the mindset of it's one thing to hear about history, but it's a different thing to come in and see you know, the plight of some of these small communities, some of these small towns, and kind of reliving that history and putting yourself maybe in a time warp a little bit and say, hey, you know, what would it have been like for me? That's the inspiring part for me, is to be able to say, it wasn't just a moment in time, but it's a real opportunity to make those connections and share those stories and experience with somebody else so that this history doesn't get lost.
Selma sprang overnight from an obscure southern town to the front pages of world newspapers. This church was headquarters in the Negro drive for the right to vote, and it was here that Martin Luther King came to lend his support to the campaign. He pointed out that from Selma's 14,000 Negroes, only a few more than 300 had been registered at the polls.
She mentioned the 3 M's about the Martin Luther King: money, motivation, and media. That's what Selma needs now. You think about our city used to be a city that had an Air Force base across the river. We used to have a candy factory, a cigar factory, the railroad, the shipping industry. All these buildings that's pretty much was our economy in Selma. Those things got taken away, and so now this is what you see. You see the history in the museums, and you know, you guys come in and people come in all the time and see the city. But the problem is, economically, Selma's kind of struggling a little bit. And so me being a former Seattle Seahawks player, former NFL player, still coming home quite often. We're here for Thanksgiving, so you guys are leaving. We'll still be here. We're trying to find ways to get those 3 M's: money, media, and motivation, and really motivation for the students.
Selma's difficult. Because you have the Edmund Pettus Bridge that so many people know about, but the story of Selma is so much more than a bridge. And what happened soon after the walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, this march for voting rights, there was what is best termed as white flight. And they elected black officials. Once black officials were put into place, white people left, businesses left, the tax dollars left, and the town was left to die.
When you guys leave and go back, make sure that the impact that you guys felt, that you share that impact with the next generation too, those kids, so that you can bring some people back and we can kind of have this dialogue so that my kids and the kids that you all are impacted by your generosity and your donations and your work, they can understand how important Selma is to the generations and to the nation in general in terms of progress and things that we don't want to go back to, as we're so close to seeing some of these things kind of rear their ugly head again, right?
And to walk through it with Ben, one of the things he spoke of so beautifully was that it's important that people like him who are from Selma come back and have the chance to invest in Selma and build Selma back up, so that way it becomes what the people there need it to be, and not a memorial tourist town because of the bridge that exists in its city limits.
When you think about like where you come from, Selma and my Selma roots have raised me and kind of groomed me to the person I am. And so when I come to places like the Seattle Seahawks and the city of Seattle, and people talk about the person that I am, I give all credit back to my upbringing in Selma. And so it's important for me to still live and kind of play out that same legacy, that upbringing wherever I go, to show, hey, you know, my character, my beliefs in terms of diversity and inclusion and equity, all those things are shaped and formed from that foundation I got in my hometown. And so I think it's important for all of us from, you know, those historical places to not lose sight of where we've come from when we go out and expand, but also just importantly, bring people back too. And I think that's been my biggest thing is like, you know, you hear that Ben's from Selma, Alabama. I sure am. Would you like to go? The footage that we've seen from that tour in Selma, even from that time in November, doesn't look the same. The recent tornado came in and destroyed some of the areas downtown. We started thinking about you know, how much those smaller communities that don't have the resources, don't have the companies and the infrastructure, when a storm and a, you know, natural disaster comes through, it's devastating. And so we're now trying to work hard to rebuild Selma, to raising awareness of what needs to take place to kind of help get Selma back to where it was, even from our pilgrimage and our tour in November.
We're here in Stone Mountain. It's wild being out here, I'm not gonna lie. I'm from the South, but to see it firsthand and the history behind it, it's kind of wild, man. And I would advise everybody, getting their books, man, start learning this stuff, because I'm a firm believer of, if you don't know your history, you don't know where you're going. If you don't know your history, then you don't know what you're up against, essentially, right? Like, knowing your history allows you to be able to know what has happened. So when these things, because they say history repeats itself. So if you don't know that, and when it does repeat itself, how are you going to maneuver in that space? How did the people before you get through that, right? So I'm a firm believer in that, and I'm constantly trying to grow in that space, because growing up, it wasn't something I was very interested in. But as I become an adult and I have kids, and I'm realizing that a lot of these things do continue to be a cycle, okay, how do we get ourselves out of this?
Yeah.
Now that is wild. I didn't realize it was that dang on big. Sheesh.
The laser show used to be a complete tribute to the Confederacy, but I came to see it in 2021 just to see what changes they had made, and it's still a joke. It's funny.
What they do at Stone Mountain is they have these holographic celebrations where they recount the history of the Confederacy, and they tell this story in a really dramatized and romanticized way. And most people in the South, if you ask about it, they will contest that it had nothing to do with slavery. It had everything to do with states' rights. And we know what that's code for, and you can't separate the two.
And it used to end with this big fireworks show that was red, white, and blue, and it was stars and stripes forever. And the entire lawn would stand, and you would think that you were at a Klan rally. Mm-mm. They would sing along, they would link arms, people would be crying. They would just think that they were in heaven watching this laser show.
Who owns All of this.
State of Georgia. State of Georgia.
Okay.
So my tax dollars are used to, I am paying to, and I say this all the time, they're probably sick of me saying, I am paying my state to disrespect me.
Yeah, I had never been to Stone Mountain, and I never knew anything about Stone Mountain until we were doing some of our pre-work, and we watched a video about it. And it was outstanding that that exists in 2023. And in fact, not only does it exist, it's protected. It's written into the state legislature that nobody can touch that particular memorial. So to be there, one, was an eye-opening experience because it's one that I never had, but to be there with Cliff, who was also experiencing it for the first time, it meant a lot for the both of us, particularly with Cliff and his Haitian ancestry and the investments that he's making in community today for young people, holding all of that history together. It was dynamic. And then we went and looked at the flag memorial they have, where they still have Confederate flags that are standing there today. And I simply don't understand it. Fundamentally, I don't get it.
I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, so seeing Confederate flags was a normal thing for us. So the fact that it still exists, honestly, isn't necessarily surprising to me. I think it was more surprising to me that other people didn't realize this was still going on in the South.
And the Klan was born on top of the mountain in November of that year. That's 1915. And if you know Birth of the Nation, that movie had premiered in California that February. And if you don't know Birth of the Nation, here's the plot. The black legislature of South Carolina steals the protagonist's white daughter, and the KKK saves them. Okay, that's kind of the plot, and there's no black people in it. It's white people with blackface. And this was like a critically acclaimed film. And the NAACP protested it, and that's where the KKK gets the Burning Cross idea from that movie. And so they start up the KKK here. Sam Venable gives them easement to the mountain that the Klan keeps until '58, and they meet here. Every year they have their annual Klan clavern on this mountain.
You know, it's interesting just taking the trip yesterday, you know, to the mountain, or to Stone Mountain, and I'm from Jacksonville, Florida, but both of my parents are Haitian. So, you know, I had a different perspective on life, just in general in America, because at home, I mean, to this day, I still just speak Creole to my mom. I don't speak English. You know, it's just Creole in the household. So at home, everything was the Haitian culture. So the language, the food, you know, just everything about life was just all about the Haitian culture. But when I walked outside of those doors, immediately it's all about, you know, the American culture. I remember just being at football practice and guys in these big, you know, 4x4 trucks with the Confederate flag on the back of it. And that was just what it was. We just knew we shouldn't go in that direction. You know, it's just so interesting that something like that can be so prevalent and just be in your face and you really not even understand what the value, what it means, and how hateful that might be, right? And so as I take these types of trips, as I learn, as I got two little boys, and it's all about teaching them the way of the world, obviously, and the history of America. You need to know what's happened in the past. I need to know what happened in the past. And can we come together to change the narrative? Yeah. Can we come together to uplift people in America, right?
Apex was special because we had a young lady who led us through that. And we had a chance to hear her explain the history. And that gave me so much hope. I mean, if young people can hold history the way that she held history, where we are going is an incredible place that we have yet to even imagine.
It was amazing. It was great because, again, history, learning history, I'm infatuated with it, especially being Haitian American as well, right? Because I've been trying to learn my history with Haiti, but then you add the American component to it as well. It just, you know, just being able to dive deeper into it, understanding that there's so many similarities with Haiti and the United States as well. I think it's life-changing, and I feel like everyone should try to check out these museums throughout the country.
But to be in Apex, and Apex did a wonderful job walking us through a history of what it was like before we were enslaved. It told important stories. Like, there's a reason why particular parts of Africa were targeted. You know, this wasn't people who are going over and and just finding black people and throwing them on ships. It was a targeted enslavement where they needed to grow rice here. So they found people who were uniquely skilled at growing rice. When they had other needs, they would go to the continent and find people who were uniquely skilled at doing those things. And they would enslave those people specifically because of the skill sets they had. And because there was hundreds of years of ancestral lineage being passed down through those hands that enabled them to do things with great skill and great efficiency. That's why those bodies were targeted. That's why those bodies were brought here, because they needed to build up the economy of America, and they knew that they could pillage bodies in Africa and get away with it in all kind of egregious ways. And so because it started there, it was helpful grounding, because so often our history starts with enslavement, but our ancestors existed before slavery. And then it walks you up to current. And then there's many artifacts throughout the space that celebrate the accomplishments of black folks here in America, to remind us that no matter how far we've had to journey, we are constantly striving to get back to the place of freedom that we knew, that we know, that's held within our bones, that's held within our DNA.
I think that most of what I have learned is still processing. I'm still processing it. It's been a lot. This is my first time coming to the South, and one of the things that I have been processing over that time period is that what you learn in school is that these things happened kind of in a vacuum. You know, Martin Luther King existed, Martin Luther King died. Emmett Till existed, Emmett Till died. You know, and so on. But it's almost like they create these silos so that you can't connect the dots. And this pilgrimage has helped me to be able to put them all together.
History is everywhere. Right here in the Pacific Northwest, there's a ton of history about historical harms that we can learn from. I mean, we interned people here because we were afraid of their ethnic background and assumed that they would cause terror to our country because we were at war with Japan. In the state of Oregon, it was illegal to be black in Oregon. You could not live in Oregon and be black. It was against the law. There is a reason why there's such a small percentage of black people that live in Oregon today. The challenge here is, it's not how do we just acknowledge the harm and say, yeah, that happened, right? And like, let's move on. It's, yeah, that happened. We have to make repair, and so we can move on in an earnest and honest way. You know, if I do something to you and I say, yep, I did that, and I just move on, there's something unsettled that lives within you. There's a piece that's missing within you, because yes, I've acknowledged it, but I haven't done anything to make that right. We have to acknowledge as a country, we've done some things that have caused harm, the kind of harm that is still manifesting today, because we've yet to do more than acknowledge it. We've yet to make repair. And repair is necessary as we journey towards a more just world.